May 13, 7 p.m. First thing before we review and approve the minutes from the last meeting, towards the end of last meeting, I believe it was off camera, we got an announcement that Joe Lombardi, who is our engineer, is going to be retiring. And Joe has been probably serving here for close to 25 years, if not over 25 years, and coming to Shelter Island that long. So we're so happy for you, Joe, and we're going to miss you though. And we wanted to just take a moment to thank you for your service. Honestly, I think your calm demeanor and your expertise has really helped, a great deal in the success of the planning board, past and present. So Joe brought his colleague, who is Rick Wesnowski, who will be replacing Joe as our engineer for the planning board. So welcome, Rick, as well. So thank you, Joe, for your service.
It was only 6 months in where he turned gray, so I'm sorry, Rick.
Okay, so let's review and approve the minutes from the previous meeting, which was April 8th, 2025. Everyone got that circulated by Jessica. Were there any corrections, additions? So if somebody could kindly make a motion then to
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Sean. Second.
Second.
David Austin, thank you. Thank you. That motion carried. Actually, let's just do roll call. So David Kriegel.
David Kriegel
David Austin.
is present.
Present. Marcus Castle.
Here.
Julie Weisenberg here. Matthew Fox.
Here.
And Sean Davey.
Present.
And Greg Cranford is not here tonight. Okay. I'd like to go over some of the bills that we have. So the first one is from the Rayner Group. That's for our engineering services. And this was for the month of April. In particular, the bulk of that work was Crescent Beach LLC and the Fowler Trust subdivision. Both of those are subdivisions. And so that was the bulk of that invoice from April. The amount was $4,418.75. So if that's acceptable to everyone, then I would just need someone to make a motion to accept.
I'll make a motion to accept it all.
Second.
Okay, good. Thank you, gentlemen. And that motion carried. Second one, invoice from Perillo Hill. So that is our outgoing attorney, Tim Hill, who was actually our interim attorney for this beginning of the year. So that was for professional services back in February and March. And the bulk of that was Cheekwood Avenue, some attorney appearances here in person, teleconference, and also reviewing some of the resolutions and reviewing correspondence, in particular helping Rick, who was our incoming attorney. So there was a little bit of overlap there. And that's from Tim, and that amount was $3,260. So if that's acceptable to everyone here, then I would just need someone else to make a motion.
Make a motion to accept.
Matt, second from Sean. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Third one is our invoice from PW Grosser. That was for the SECRA for Cheekwood Avenue LLC wetlands application, and that was from April 2025. That was the largest that was actually their only services that they provided to us. And their invoice was $2,625. If that's.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to accept.
Yes, thank you. Second?
Second.
Second from Sean, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. And the last one, this is from Wayland Filer, that's our current attorney, Rick, for services provided in April 25. The breakdown of that was, again, just in-person appearances, SECRA, sort of the overlap in working with Tim, and going over correspondence and advising myself as chair and one other planning board member. And that amount is $6,324. So if I could get a motion to. Thank you, David Kriegel. Second?
Second.
Matt, okay. Tie on that one. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Before we go on to, Sean, did you want to?
Just a question. I believe the town board made some amendments that will have applicants pay certain parts of expenses going forward. I think some of it applies to us and maybe just environmental reviews or something, but I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't really quite sure what the changes were. And I don't know, Meg is here, so maybe.
I guess, Meg Larson, can you? Or
Yeah.
you, or whichever, it doesn't matter.
Yes, so the town board has, for public hearing, we just had resolutions that would put some of the environmental expenses onto the applicant. So we did that for all the different code chapters that involved a secret review or some kind of analyst. So the last one that we have to do is for the dot code, because the dot code hadn't yet been adopted by the state. So now that it's been adopted by the state, we can do the amendments, so that any secret reviews done under the dot code would also be paid by the applicant.
Are they in effect now then, except for the top code? No, they still have to be adopted.
Right, we still have to vote on that. So we had a
And
hearing, but there was no comment from the public, so now we'll go to resolution.
if adopted and there is an application in process, does it apply if an environmental review has not yet started, or it has to be the application first?
I would have to look at the language in the code to see when the start date is and how it would impact current in-process applications. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll look into that for you, let you know.
That's,
Get your applications in.
that's what we're kind of implying, maybe, right? The other thing I wanted to go over is just take a couple minutes to talk about meeting decorum, okay? Now, just very quickly, I mean, obviously the town board, planning board, town committees have been pretty fortunate in that we generally don't encounter that much strife at meetings, and we've had mostly respectful interlocution, natural turn taking, but I think it's always really important to think ahead and prepare for occasions where, you could have a meeting where emotions run high. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with applications of people's most treasured thing, their land and their dwellings, right, their homes. And we're very sensitive to that. So we basically, our job is to listen to these interactions, to ask questions, to get answers. And when we are somehow impeded from doing that, I think it really causes delays, it makes everyone frustrated, and we can't do our jobs. And so if it ever comes to a point, and again, we're very fortunate, this usually doesn't come up in our meetings, but if it ever comes to a point where an applicant or an applicant's representative, or maybe somebody from the public, or even members of our own board are not able to engage in that natural turn taking, being able to articulate sentences, being able to answer. And if someone is not being respectful in that way and not adhering to meeting decorum, the best practice that I would like to have this in place moving forward is that we will ask that person or persons to stop or sit down, take a little break until they can comport themselves, and we'll move on to something else on the agenda, and we'll round back to that person and see if they're now ready to proceed, just to give someone a moment to relax and gather their thoughts, okay? So that's how we will maintain decorum in the planning board moving forward, and I trust that everyone is going to be able to do that without any problem.
Well said.
Thank you. All right. The first thing we have to act on is our resolution for Cheekwood Avenue LLC wetlands application. That's number 8 for 2025. It's a very long resolution, and I actually just spoke to our attorney a few minutes before we started the meeting because I wanted to get permission to maybe abridge some of this because it's 7 pages. Hold on one second. Excuse me. I think I'm going to start basically. If you look at the front page, the hearing dates that we had that were noted here by our attorney are December 10th, December 10th of 2024, January 14th of 2025, February 11th of 2025. And we go over the findings of facts and determination of the board. Basically, Rick summarized the purpose of the applicant's application. Obviously, they were seeking a wetlands permit as per 129 of our code. They were building a 2,287 square foot accessory building with living quarters within the adjacent regulated area. We go over all the dimensions of the application, so I'm not going to go over those because we're quite well versed in that. We went over the flooding information, the secret determination, which you'll recall was a type 1, negative declaration. We put down the date of determinants, April 8th. We went over the standards, which we also already know, that the location not impose a risk, that it not diminish the wetlands, that the project not have a negative impact on the quality and quantity of groundwater, that it will not create a net increase. And then 5, that the applicant has demonstrated that there are no practical alternatives, and that the applicant has submitted information to describe alternative site locations and configurations in order to validate number 4, to show that it's not, okay? So in our finding of fact, which is on page 3, we declared ourselves, well, we were named lead agency, and basically the town comprehensive plan calls for regulatory action directed towards the town to protect our wetlands. We went, our attorney put that summary in here. We went through all the relevant pieces of SECRA. I'm on number 3. 4, we reviewed the difference between the vegetative buffer and the adjacent regulated area, deemed this first 75 and the additional 25. Again, so pages 2, 3 are mostly summaries of our law and the applicant's description and facts of the application. We talked about where it's located. We talked about the property is low-lying with elevations that just reach 7 feet above mean sea level. We talked about the bulkhead a little bit, FEMA management. On to number 7, we looked at the property line and basically where this building would be situated in terms of the town code. Our attorney summarized all the configurations of the applicant's rooms on the accessory structure. We included the factual information about the letter of no jurisdiction from the New York State DEC. I think this is important to go over right now. So 10, the applicant offered mitigation in connection with the project, including the installation of the 7 dry wells, configured for a 4-inch storm event, and provision of the now 15-foot non-turf nearshore buffer consisting of fescue and clover. The board's environmental consultant had recommended planting beach grass as more suitable to retain soils in the sandy and salty environment. We went over the proposed stormwater runoff mitigation and the minimal non-turf buffer. The applicant's engineer provided the town with some examples of other projects that were done in the adjacent regulated area, but the board disagreed with those characterizations. By and large, those other applications involve renovations or additions to pre-existing buildings or addition of amenities such as pool patios, sleeping quarters, joined to a garage, as an example. And in most recent cases, there was no practical way for the applicant to avoid construction within the regulated areas of those 10 named examples. They did not concern, however, buildings new construction of more than 2,000 square feet designed for living and sleeping and living purposes. Pardon. The applicant has not established that it cannot build its accessory living quarters outside of the town's regulated area from wetlands as per our code 129-5, A, 5, and 6. Under our town code, the applicant bears the responsibility for demonstrating that there are no practical alternatives which allow the project to be sited outside of the regulated area. With respect to the covered porch, which represents a large part of the intrusion into the 25-foot adjacent regulated area, Deborah Shepard stated at a public meeting on June 13, 2023, that she had always wanted a covered porch, and that was the reason for the porch. The applicant's desire for a porch, which projects forward into the adjacent regulated area, is not sufficient to satisfy the requirements of Town Code 129-5. The porch may be a desirable amenity, but is not necessary to the primary function of the proposed accessory building, which is to provide sleeping accommodations for the applicant's guests. The applicant failed to show that there were no alternatives that would allow the accessory living quarters to be constructed in that, outside of the regulated area. But it's patently obvious that such alternatives do exist. Even accounting for the 40-foot yard front setback from Cheekwood Avenue and the 20-foot side yard setback from the adjoining property to the applicant's west, there exists a building envelope landward of the regulated area from wetlands, which is sufficient in size to accommodate the building itself, minus the covered porch. This is apparent from the review of the applicant's floor plans as given by Ann McDonald of January 17, 2025. And the applicant attempted to argue on January 17, 2025 through the EAF that there are no practical alternatives. And they stated, quote, the applicant looked at reducing the size of the building. However, it could not be reduced in a way to allow it to be located outside the regulated area while meeting the goals of the project, which are to provide additional living space that would allow for short-term guests to stay at the property with reasonable privacy and autonomy expected with extended family and close friends. That was straight from the narrative. So the board disagrees. Based on the information presented to the board, it is possible for the applicant to stay outside of Chapter 129's regulated area by eliminating the said covered porch and redesigning the building such that it is smaller while still having 2 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. And then the applicant contended that such a reduced building size would eliminate, quote, the ability to have design elements, layout, and amenities allowed by town code and desired by the applicant. It is unclear to the planning board what important amenities would be disallowed by a smaller accessory building that does not transgress into the regulated area. It cannot be reasonably argued that the covered porch is necessary to the applicant's aim of providing its guests with reasonable privacy and autonomy. The planning board is cognizant of the town code about accessory structures has to be at least 480 square feet, and the applicant asserts that the proposed building has 780 square feet of eligible floor area on the first floor, plus another 536 on the second. And on February 13, 2025, although it is not clear whether this includes the covered porch, the portions of both floors in that do intrude into the regulated area. I'm on the last page here. The board's own calculations based on the applicant's architectural floor plans, which were revised January 17, 2025, would seem to indicate that approximately 130 square feet of each floor is currently proposed within the adjacent regulated area. We conclude that the applicant could readily reconfigure the proposed building such that each floor would still have at least 480 square feet as required by 133-7. A reduced size accessory building fully outside the adjacent regulated area would likely still have a gross floor area of approximately 1,600 square feet, although it would have no porch. That is ample for a 2-bedroom accessory building with sleeping quarters and would still enable the applicant to meet their expressed objectives for the project. It is unnecessary for the planning board to specifically detail environmental drawbacks associated with this application. The Shelter Island Town Board has already determined that projects outside the wetlands regulated area will have a reduced environmental impacts as compared with those projects which take place inside. As just noted, the applicant has reasonable alternatives that would allow it to build accessory sleeping quarters fully outside the regulated area. So disposition of the application is in Part G, basically for the reasons set forth, which I sort of abridged here because, again, it's a 7-page document. I sort of skipped over the summary and the applicant's, the actual piece of the structure, because we've been over that so many times. But for these reasons set forth above, the planning board finds that the applicant has failed to satisfy the requirements of 129-5, A, 5, and 6 of the town code, which are required for permit issuance. The board therefore denies the application discussed herein for a wetlands permit pursuant to Town Code Chapter 129 for the construction of a 2,287 square foot 2-story accessory building with sleeping quarters. So we're going to take a vote. We're going to do roll call for the vote. So I need someone to make a motion to put that forward.
I'll motion that we have a vote.
Second,
Second.
David Credo. Sorry, Sean, I looked over. It's Dave. So, All in favor? To make the motion? No, just to make the
Thank you.
motion, just to make the motion. Okay, favor?
All in
Make a
favor of
motion?
having a vote?
Yes, aye.
Aye.
That was carried. Okay, so let's take a vote now. David Kriegel?
Yeah.
He's not-
Favor of.
You can't vote.
Oh, I
Sorry.
can't.
Oh, I should have had you. I'm sorry, it's habit because I'm looking over. Right there. I'm sorry, okay. David Austin.
I got here too late.
I vote opposed.
Opposed, okay. Marcus,
Opposed.
opposed. In favor? Julie?
Favor.
In favor.
Sean, in favor? Okay, that motion carried, so the wetlands application is denied as stated. That's probably why I had you and Greg sit out
Sit
on the
over.
last one, because I look over and you're right there. It's just, it's too tempting, so
But we're done with that now.
I'm done with that. Yeah. All right, so we're going to close it. And we're going to go into our work session. So on the work session, we have a couple of lot line
We have
adjustments.
to vote to close it.
Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, so we, thank you. So can I have a motion to close the,
I'll make a
Business
motion to
meeting.
close the business meeting.
thank you, second on the business meeting closure?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carried. So we're going to now move into our work session. And on this one, as I was saying, we have a couple lot line modification applications which are still pending, namely Elliott Bousman, lot line adjustment, but they have until June 9th. We're still waiting on final maps for that. On the Radigan Shelter Island LLC, lot line adjustment, again, we're waiting for the deeds to be reviewed, and they have until June 9th, and I'm assuming if they don't have
I
them.
have reviewed the deeds and approved them.
Oh, you did, okay, okay.
There's a letter to that effect.
You have a letter, okay, just past Friday?
Oh, there's a couple
No,
weeks ago.
yeah,
Oh, okay. All right, because you still have it on here. Okay, so we did get those. All right, I'll check back on what the date on that was. And then we have 3 and 5 Borough Hall Lane LLC, and we're still waiting on deed. You haven't gotten those. All right, and they have until July 8th. And then Defoe and Shearer lot line adjustment, that's a similar deadline of close, it's June 10th. And I haven't seen those. No, just, okay. All right. On to our subdivision applications. Let's start with the Bloom Minor subdivision. We're still waiting for their final application, and their deadline is August 11th, so it's still sufficient time there. West Neck Creek Cottage LLC subdivision, again, we're waiting for a final application. We have not received that yet, but they have until October 14th of this year. Next up is our Fowler Trust subdivision. And Joe, they actually turned in an updated application. And Joe, you're gonna go over that with us now on that memo. And Jessica made copies of Joe's memo for you. It's in the packet.
Provide
Do you want to come up to the mic, or Joe, or? Well, one last time.
You better sit. But with the map in front of me.
True, okay, just as long as we can hear you, I'm sure.
I'll speak louder.
Okay.
This is a preliminary application. If some of the new board members aren't clear. Major subdivisions have 3 steps. There's sketch plan, there's preliminary, then there's final. So this subdivision has already received sketch plan approval. Now we're on to preliminary. There was a map that was submitted initially. It had some items that needed to be changed. and that was discussed at the meeting last month. Those items have been addressed in this revised preliminary map, preliminary plat. But just to go over some of them. The park areas along Nostrand Parkway have been relabeled conservation easements. Some of the conservation easements is 70,321 square feet. This represents 10% of the site. We'll get there.
Okay, problem with that.
Yeah, there is a problem with that. The exterior boundary and lot lines have been changed to solid lines. Principal and accessory structure setbacks and other accessory structure setbacks have been revised and do not extend to the proposed conservation easements. Five-lot subdivision, major subdivision, pursuant to chapter 20 of the Shelter Island Town Code and type 1 action. Therefore, coordinated review is required. First step in this process would be to determine lead agency. The other agencies that are involved in the Suffolk County Department of Health Services and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Planning board will have to notify the other involved agencies and indicate that it would like to serve as lead agency. Copy of the application, long environmental assessment form, and the subdivision map should be included with the letter requesting lead agency status. Involved agencies have 30 days to respond to the request. So basically, at this point, the map is sufficient. We have the application and long form EAF. We can request lead agency status from the involved agencies at this time.
Right.
Now, the preliminary application will require a public hearing. That public hearing cannot take place until secret is done. So hopefully we can send out the notices to the agencies. They have 30 days to respond. Probably the next meeting, we'll have an idea of whether the planning board is going to be the lead agency. Because we're either going to hear from the agencies or they're not going to respond, and it'll be lead agency by default. Then we can begin reviewing the environmental assessment form, do the part 2 and the part 3, and come up with a secret determination, and then move forward with scheduling the public hearing.
So John, I just want to check with you, in addition to, agreeing to send out the letters and the package, is that something that you're sure that your firm can handle to do that?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to double check, because I wasn't sure from your email what you meant, that you were just sending out the letters and that was it, or you were willing to do all.
So we've done that also.
Okay, I just want to double check. But we have to make sure that the package is correct with the maps and so forth.
Yes.
So, you want me to comment?
Yes, please.
So, my interpretation of your code is that a park area has to be a separate parcel of land. It's not acceptable to just make it a conservation easement. A park area is a separate out parcel. It can be deeded to the town of Shelter Island, deeded to a property owners association, but it should be a separate parcel of land, or multiple parcels. It doesn't have to just be one parcel. But it has to aggregate 10% of the property's lot area. And in the nearshore peninsular overlay district, you cannot waive the park area requirement. So the dilemma, as Joe has pointed out, because we just talked about this just before the meeting began, is if those conservation easements along Nostrand Parkway converted to even multiple park areas, which they could be, the problem is that the lots that become, each of the lots are using a narrow frontage for their access, they become flag lots. And your code says in a major subdivision, you can't have more than 40% of the property as flag lots, unless a variance is obtained to allow that. So that's the dilemma right now is, I don't think the map conforms to your code. And I don't think you can send out a lead agency letter without, you have to send it out with the application and with the map or proposal before you, and that map, that proposal should meet zoning, or should meet the subdivision regulations. That's the problem right now.
Carl? Yes, yeah. Answer.
So a couple things just in response to what Rick said, and I,
Big name.
Oh, can you say your name? Just
Carl
so
Dacasa,
it's on Zoom, I don't know.
860 Montauk Highway, Waterloo, New York, for the applicant. Good evening. The code says that there has to be a set-aside recorded with the county clerk's office. An easement is a set-aside, and an easement would be recorded with the county clerk's office. So I respectfully disagree with Mr. Whalen's interpretation. I would note the sketch plan approval called for these easements. I would note that this board has approved previous subdivisions with conservation easements serving as the park requirement. So to change the position now would create much larger implications with respect to the board's authority. And there is nothing that says that this board must segregate these parcels as separate tax parcels, deeding ownership to the town. It says an irrevocable set-aside recorded with the county clerk's office. An easement is recorded with the county clerk's office. An irrevocable easement obviously cannot be revoked, and it's set aside for that parkland purpose. So Rick brought this to me, his opinion to me this evening, and we certainly can vet it off on the side. But I would take a position counter to his with respect to what the code requires. I think that was all I wanted to say. I think Joe covered the rest.
Can I make a comment? on this?
Sure, David, go ahead.
You know, I wasn't on the board when the original sketch plan was proposed or approved, but that being said, I don't think the review and approval of that means that the board can have no further opinions about how the land is subdivided, does it?
No, and definitely not. There's reasons it's a three-tiered process, but it certainly guides the applicant in their planning process. At the very,
Understood,
the sketch plan in the first instance.
yeah.
We had vetted the conservation easement at that time, serving this purpose. And remember, a conservation easement will preserve this property in perpetuity for whatever purpose the board prefers. As far as the town goes and the people of the town go, it will make no difference to them as far as what this property is, except that it'll still be on the tax rolls, A, and B, it won't be a liability for the town if the easement is, if it's just an easement and not a separate deeded parcel. So I think-
I'm a
I
little
don't think-
confused by that, because there is a section in the code which addresses conservation easements, which call for a third party like Peconic Land Trust to take, I guess it's ownership of that easement. And I would assume it does come off the tax rolls, but in this case, it's an easement without any not-for-profit or conservation agency taking ownership of it.
Town would be the owner. The owner of
So then
a property with
Does
easement,
it come off the tax rolls or not?
no, because the town wouldn't be the fee owner. It would just own the rights of the easement, which would mean it can be preserved in perpetuity.
But let me just clarify a couple things. You can't compel a dedication to the town. So let's just say the town board doesn't want it, or the applicant doesn't want to deed the park area to the town. The applicant created not for a homeowners association to own and maintain it. That would be their other alternative. The other thing, as far as conservation easements go, they're created under section 247 of the general municipal law. And the owner of the property subject to the conservation easement does get a tax deduction for the area that's covered by a conservation easement. So
So they're paying taxes, but they're paying the same tax on it, or they're getting a tax reduction?
They should be getting a tax reduction for the area of their property that's burdened by the conservation easement.
If it's a conservation easement versus.
Right, and if it's a park area, then they're not paying, then it obviously is not the rules at all.
It's the town's property.
Yeah. Can I go further on this?
Yes.
You know, my feeling is that the easement isn't worth that much, because nobody would build a house, a waterfront house, on a bluff with a view of Peconic Bay at the backside of the property. They're going to, like the house that's there, go as far forward as possible. And so that area is giving a benefit to the owner because they're getting a tax reduction for doing nothing. Because they're not sacrificing anything, as they would if there was a park where there would actually be a piece of land that's now reserved from future construction. That's a meaningful piece of land, presumably.
The proposal would be to have undersized, undevelopable park areas, so not meaningful piece of land. And there would be no distinction between, we're agreeing to setbacks from the conservation easement, so there really is no distinction.
They don't mean it, nobody's gonna build back there. Well, I shouldn't say nobody.
But I guess the question is, what's the distinction between owning it in fee title and the easement? That's what we're talking about. Because that creates larger implications,
Which are,
that now we have flag lots.
Oh, I see, yeah.
This board has approved subdivisions with parkland via easement before. I don't think, and I'll let Mr. Whalen speak to himself, I don't think he has a necessarily an opposition to the easement. It's just his interpretation is that the code requires dedication.
Yeah, I want to understand, that's correct. I'm not in any way suggesting that it's preferable to have park areas as opposed to conservations.
Yeah.
I'm construing the code to say that, and there's multiple provisions in the code that I'm looking at for me to reach that conclusion. And my deduction is that a park area is intended to be under the code a separate deeded parcel of land. That's all I'm saying.
in the description of the kind of subdivision methodology, the first step is the parkland set aside. And it's only, if that's not at least as I read it, if that's not feasible, then you can resort to another type of easement. But
you
parkland,
You can't do that in the nearshore and peninsula overlay district. You can't, because in other districts, you can accept a fee in lieu of the dedication.
right.
But the code specifically says that's not an option in this overlay zone.
Was there early on a study of parkland set aside as opposed to this narrow strip of easement?
Was there a study of?
When they first came in with a subdivision proposal, did any of them ever include a park set aside, or was it always this narrow conservation easement?
This was the set aside that was offered.
So it was never presented as a potential parkland. It was always this conservation easement.
Yes.
Are you talking about the legal distinction or just the position of it and where it is?
He's asking, what did they ask for first? Did they ever ask for?
That was the first.
The applicant ever asked for a park?
Idea was just to have it right up in
We
front.
came
It's
in
always
with
in front.
this. The board vetted it in the sketch plan approval, asked for setbacks from it for further conservation, so that we couldn't build right on the line of the easement.
Right.
That was updated, and the revised building envelopes are on this, the new map that you have before.
I'm curious, does the beginning of the easement begin at the property line? At the
Yes.
road? Because there is I think it's a 10-foot essentially town right-of-way. I know that because they just came and cut a bunch of trees down on my
I
property.
think you're talking about setbacks, front yard setbacks?
No, I'm talking about where the town can come in and say this tree isn't healthy, or whatever reason they have, and cut it down, which they just did.
Well, traditionally, your road right of way is wider than the pavement.
Correct.
So the pavement is 28 feet wide, the town is still going to control area along the edge.
So shouldn't
But the right of way is not on these properties, it's up at the boundary line. The right of way is the area of the road, unimproved and improved.
And does the conservation easement start at the pavement, or does it just start at
No,
this
at the
town's,
property line.
Right, at the owner's property line.
which is
In from the road.
from the road, that dimension?
Yeah.
Understood.
David, at the time, to the board then, it seemed favorable to have this easement, parkland, whatever you want to call it, out in front, because that preserved the look of Nostrum Parkway, and that was a concern for all of us at the time, so that's why at that point in time, it seemed, that was actually the only idea you came forth with anyway.
was,
And the applicant was very willing to do that. So-
Yes.
I'm sure they were, because they didn't really have to set anything aside.
So ultimately,
I mean,
If-
that's not really a fair.
Ultimately, it's.
I guess
issue is
the
that-
question is it, I think that it does benefit the town to have that tree line area on the road, but it's also really easy for them to give that because they really wouldn't be using it anyway. And so I think you've agreed to additional setback from that, right?
That's true.
And so I think that some of the accommodation,
We asked for
we
more.
might want more, and I think the question also is within that setback, is it also untouched? So it's not just the setback, but you're leaving it natural, so that functionally, it is still your land, but you are not taking down trees and creating an open area. I think that, for me personally, that would go a long way, because you have a functionally and creating a larger conservation space, but it's still your land.
So the setback was for structures, and from what I hear, you want it to be, increase the buffer, in other words, not just.
I think that's partially the goal, is that I think we leaned in, my belief is that they leaned into its setbacks for structures, but the underlying reason was really, we want more natural.
Yeah.
As
So it's
far as we-
really a conservation easement.
And I would qualify that it's not a nothing give, because we could have cleared up to the road. Whether or not it's within structural setbacks, we could have cleared the woods.
No, fair enough, but then is that what they would really want for their own privacy or what have you? So we're in this kind of like, who's benefiting? Is it 50-50? Is it the town benefiting? Is it you benefiting? And so that's why we're looking for some greater accommodation, I think.
Mutual, it's not about.
Absolutely.
making
And
enough.
that's why I think the setbacks or some other accommodation.
And the interests of the property owner are not irrelevant, certainly not.
Absolutely.
So,
But I think, so just to get back to the point that Rick was trying to make in terms of the package that we have to send out to move this along, is we need to make sure that the maps are acceptable. And your concern as our attorney is that right now they are not, because we have to make a decision on whether it's supposed to be, whether we're gonna accept conservation easements or whether we're looking to make this parkland.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to create trouble here. This is something I was going through the map today and I went back through the code, like, not my opinion, it's what my opinion is. Not that there's any great benefit to it being separate park parcels versus conservation easements, but, that's how I interpret the code. So,
Could you point out where it says it has to be separate?
so several places. First of all, the definitions in the code, this is all under subdivision land, so chapter 111. There is a very brief definition of park dedication. Park dedication is a dedication that implies conveyance, like a deed. Dedication, a conveyance of a fee interest, is what I mean.
does it say that?
No, it just says a dedication. It's not, if in fact, we wouldn't even do it. A dedication or reservation of land in the subdivision for park purposes. And then when you go to the,
Park or recreation area?
yeah, and then in the design standards, section 111-34.1 deals with park and recreation area requirements in subdivision. This whole park area thing is kind of strange. Among other things, certain sensitive areas like wetlands or wetland adjacent areas are not allowed in park areas. So it's almost, and then, the title of this thing is Park and Recreation Areas Requirements in Subdivisions, which almost implies that this was
Gonna be
farmland in
used.
the traditional kind of recreational playground sense. It's not very clear, but it does say that, as Carl indicated, that the dedication, if you will, is to be memorialized by an instrument satisfactory in form to the planning board, recordable in the office of the Suffolk County Clerk. Now, you could do that as an easement, that could be a deed, but other language in here, for example, when you're allowed to, when the planning board determines that a park dedication or park parcel is not necessarily the best thing, which is an option outside the nearshore overlay zone, you can require a fee in lieu of the dedication, but the fee then is based on, it shall be equal to 10% of the appraised fair market value of the entire lands covered by the subdivision plat at the time of the subdivision application. And then it talked about how the park fee should be dedicated. So you are valuing the entire property at an appraised value to determine how much the park parcel would be worth. An easement area is not even a separate parcel of land. So you normally wouldn't have a value placed on a conservation. So anyway, without going through the entire thing, my interpretation of the code put together is that it really means, and there's other language also dealing in the subdivision, it appears to mean that a park area is a separate parcel of land. You see that, for example, on the Crescent Beach subdivision. That's a separate dedicatable parcel of land.
Can be, yeah.
Now, my understanding, of course, I've been here that long, is that there may have been contrary opinions in the past. All I can do is interpret the code the way I see it today. I don't know what people decided in the past or what the basis for their interpretations were.
Is there one choice that would, well, at least Sean, I don't know how the rest of you are feeling in terms of preservation of the woodland. Is there one particular choice which, ensures that preservation? Not,
Conservation easement properly
Seems both.
drafted could
They both
protect
do,
woodland.
yeah.
But then you'd have flag lots.
No, with conservation easement, if you have a conservation because it's part of a lot, it wouldn't create flag lots. You still have a defined driveway entrance, but you do not have.
Unless you reduce the width of the easement such that everyone has the minimum street frontage and whatever's left over becomes the easement.
Yeah, it's kind of, you could, it's weird, the code says that a flag strip or flag lot has to be at least 20 feet wide, but not more than 50 feet wide. So I guess if you had 60 feet of frontage for every lot and you deepened the park area, then you could have a park area and then you wouldn't have flag lots. I mean, that would be, or you
But
took,
then you'd have 60-foot gaps.
yeah, we kind of,
Yeah.
you couldn't do it that way.
We could still have a provision that it couldn't be cleared, it's just the ownership.
Well, I don't,
Well, the park area is, the park area is not supposed to be cleared, that's the town. I haven't seen it to the town. So that would be a way around it. You could create a strip of land connecting the lots to the road that is wider than 50 feet, and then it wouldn't count as a flag lot. I guess you could do that.
again, I think the conservation easement achieves the purpose far more streamlined way. There's nothing that Rick said in my interpretation, for what it's worth, that would prohibit an easement as a means of getting this done. An easement is a reservation of land. An easement is such that it takes away any really fair market value for the property. So if you're gonna value an easement, it's probably gonna be akin to the value of the fee title. And like I said, in the code section requiring parkland, it says a set aside, irrevocable set aside that can be recorded with the clerk's office. And an easement is certainly that. So what I would like to do, and which, obviously it's your decision, but if perhaps instead of vetting this in this form, Rick and I could have a sit down and sort of go over our points, and then Rick could write perhaps a memo to the board with his final opinion after we have that discussion.
That's fine.
Reasonable.
I have one or two questions about the existing house and driveway and overhead wires, which seem to cut across two pieces of property.
The proposed properties, yeah.
Yeah. Is that house gonna remain?
In the short term, it will remain. And actually, Mr. Lombardo mentioned we might have to do temporary, if we're keeping it in that configuration, temporary access and utilities that would be extinguished upon the demolition of that.
Carl, I had a question actually, maybe that's what you're referring to. Lot 4, which contains the house, although the driveway is actually coming on lot 3, has its own access strip. So was that intended that this driveway be abandoned at some point?
I think ultimately, and I'll talk with the architects, I don't want to speak out of turn because this is a very fluid development. But ultimately, my understanding is, yes, this would be removed, that access would be abandoned. They came in here at this, you see between lots 4 and 5, there's sort of that joint access point.
Well, actually, they'd still need lot three, because lot three, that's the only access into lot three.
That wouldn't go cut across to lot four, that would be a.
Right, that's only for lot three alone.
And you know, the access points are all certainly things we can discuss if we.
How many, just overhearing that, how many of the lots currently have houses in design?
In design,
Yeah,
it's tough to say, because like I said, it's fluid. I've seen about, I think there were 2 or so that are just sort of preliminary design. It's all subject to the approvals, and they know that. So these are sort of pencil designs, but just sort of to get a concept.
and will it be different owned? I don't really understand what's happening with these properties. but-
It's gonna be owned by one family. 3, 4, and 5 will be owned by 2 siblings, a sister
I see.
and her family, 3, 4, and
And
5,
that's who's,
and a brother, lot 1 and 2.
that's who's designing the houses.
Yeah, this is not if you're curious about whether this is a developer, it is not, it's a family.
That's helpful to know.
Sorry?
That's helpful to know.
Yes.
I would just ask that you continue to think about the additional setback that has been discussed. And I think that the ultimate goal, and perhaps not articulated, was really to preserve and protect more land, not just clear it, but not build on it. And so what they're willing to do would go a long way, I think, in making us comfortable. And I don't think in reality, because of where they'll position homes and everything else, that they'll be giving up much, because they may very well have said, we weren't going to touch it anyway.
So I will absolutely discuss that. I know you want to preserve that sort of wooded corridor as much as you can. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Rick, you'll get together with him, I'll put a finer point memo together for us?
Yeah.
So as it stands right now, we're not gonna be in a position to send anything out just yet, it's waiting on that, is that
Right.
fine with
I
everyone?
think that needs to be resolved. I
And
agree.
this gives them time to also consider maybe an additional buffer on there, so.
Can I just ask a question? And it's, I don't know if it's semantics, but we choose, and usually probably most appropriately to exercise, we'll be lead agency, right?
Correct.
As a result of doing so, is that creating another $10,000 of legal bills because we're driving that process? And is there any way within those decision-making to mitigate that, or it just is what it is?
The other agencies generally won't take lead, like the DEC,
Yeah.
and they won't, is it, nothing will happen.
Just is what it is, yeah.
It always, they don't.
They're not going to respond. No, I know they're not going to respond, but it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, well, what happens is, I mean, I don't, doesn't affect me very much unless you issue a positive declaration, which I don't think they do in this application. But you will have to have, one of your consultants has to prepare, the environmental assessment forms.
Yeah.
Which we've been to.
We have.
No, I'm sure that's been the norm. I guess it's just a question of, is there any way to somehow circumvent that and
No.
lower costs? Yeah.
For the cost of something
Yeah.
else somewhere.
All right, let's move on to the next one, the Crescent Beach LLC, minor subdivision. So Joe, you also prepared a second memo on that application, right? We're still at sketch level on this one.
Yes. The board's aware. There was an initial submission for a sketch plan that had at least 3 different lots, 3 different configurations of lots and park area. And there was some discussion back and forth. And the preferred plan has been submitted and it's been labeled 3-lot sketch plan. And that's the plan that has lot 1 with 172,304 square feet. And it comprises all of the frontage on Shelter Island Sound. And lots 2 and 3 are up the hill off of Serpentine Drive. And both of those have relatively flat areas that can be built on. Now, the planning board was concerned, and I was concerned about construction on, very sloping areas on lot 1 And in addition to submitting this revised map, project sponsors representatives also submitted a lot of additional material. And it all had to do with an attempt to get a building permit on lot 1. But a permit from the New York State DEC was obtained, health department approval was obtained. Now that approval was dated August 16th, 2021. It's good for 3 years, which means it's expired. However, it's relatively easy to get an updated permit once a permit has been issued, especially when an IA system is involved. And this is an instance where there's an IA system.
That's what I had asked you about, you know,
Yeah.
so, okay.
See, it went to the zoning board of appeals for a height variance, and that was granted. And that variance was valid for 1 year, and that will have to be renewed. Now, it's interesting to note that in their decision, the zoning board of appeals had a condition that no more than 2 additional lots be created on this property, and with a total construction of no more than 6,000 square feet of living area on each lot. Very detailed construction methodology was that was prepared by Bolger and Associates, was submitted. A SWIP, stormwater pollution prevention plan, was prepared. It was reviewed and approved by the town engineer, and also by the New York State DEC Division of Water. One thing about the notice of about the Speedy's general permit that is associated with the SWIP is that the requirements were updated earlier this year. So if it hasn't already been done, the project sponsor should submit a letter of continued coverage under the Speedy's general permit.
Is it the SWIFT regulations updated?
Yes. Well, the general permit regulations. So anyway, the map that's labeled 3-lot sketch plan clarifies the concern that the planning board raised as to which map the project sponsor was interested in pursuing. The additional materials that were submitted demonstrate that a single-family residence can be constructed on lot 1, and permits for construction have been obtained from the DEC, the Health Department, Shelter Island ZBA. The SWIP has been approved by the town and the DEC. So basically, they've demonstrated that the other involved agencies that would be required in obtaining a building permit have signed off on single-family residence on lot 1.
Well, weren't all those applications based on the full lot prior to any subdivision drawings? Well, I mean, it was years ago. What we sent to the health department was based on building on the full lot, not on building on a third of it or whatever the proportion is.
Right. However, the location
It's true, but you can't apply for a building, DEC, health department, on one piece of land, totally change the configuration of the piece of land and say it's the same permit.
actually you can.
Really?
You're entitled to get a building permit on a piece of property. And you can, if the property is large enough to subdivide, you're entitled to subdivide it.
Yes.
Let me tell
Okay,
you.
Rick, let's say,
Right? Right now, the applicant has no vested rights to build anything at any part of the parcel, right? They got the permits that Joe referred to, but they also had to get a special permit for certain size houses from the town board at the power at the time. the town board apparently didn't act in a timely fashion. The owner of the property, the applicant, brought in Article 78, won in Supreme Court in such that the Supreme Court actually directed the issuance of a permit.
Understood, yeah, I
The
read
town
that.
has appealed that. While the appeal, and I talked to Tim Hill today, actually, the appeal is still pending. In fact, the appeal was only heard, oral argument was only a couple to a few weeks ago, based on what Tim told me, meaning that we're probably months from an actual decision. And in the meantime, when a municipality appeals an adverse decision against them in a land use matter, there's an automatic stay. So at the moment, the applicant, even though they have a directive from a court, that directive is being appealed, and therefore they can't even apply for a building permit right now, much less get one. So at the moment, they don't have a building permit, they don't have a right to a building permit, even, they might win the appeal, but we don't know. And they don't have, and without a building permit, you cannot commence construction, and therefore you cannot get vested rights. So I just want to be clear, they have most of the approvals, they even have a court decision that said the town board's approval should have been issued automatically, but that is being challenged by the town. And until that's resolved, the applicant doesn't actually have rights to build on lot. There is no lot 1, as you're indicating properly, because the property is subdivided. But they don't have at the moment any legal rights to build on any part of the property. Or at least, they don't have full right, they don't have permits from the town.
Understood. But if they did have the right, if all the, wouldn't those approvals still be called into question because they were for lots that no longer will
So
exist?
if they got vested rights, meaning they proceed to construction based on a validly issued permit. Once they have vested rights, they've started construction on their project. At that point, they present you with a fait accompli. They have the right to finish the project as approved. Until that day happens, this is, from the planning board's point of view in the subdivision, a blank piece of land. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where you are legally.
Yeah.
I don't,
Go ahead.
you may not want to answer this, and because I think it's maybe treading in certain waters, but your understanding of the court decision as it stands now, if it was allowed to proceed, is the court's decision allowing them to build that house in the exact place where it is, with the exact driveway where it is, and all the details, or they're allowing them to build a certain size house subject to a lot of things that we would still have input
I think the
on?
house would be placed, I think they would have the right to build the house where they propose to build it. The court did say that the town board could impose reasonable conditions on its approval. So I don't know whether the town board might limit clearing, or could they move the driveway location, maybe?
Yeah.
Not clear. I would say that the house, if they win the appeal, they could probably build the house where they proposed it.
Unfortunately, they haven't, unless I missed the drawing, they haven't shown the house on the subdivision. So we don't actually know, I mean, I measured guessing because it looked like their property line on their old drawings coincided with the retaining wall, which is about 30 feet.
He expressed, at least in here, that it was all within that lot. Because
I know it's within it, but how far is it from the, I assume they'll set the property line wherever they need to be a legal side yard. At least I think that's a side yard at that point.
Well, I mean, to my way of thinking, if they intend to build what they got, other permits for, and right now have a Supreme Court decision allowing them to build, you would want to show it on the subdivision, because they don't want to then have you approve a subdivision with a lot boundary that doesn't match what they're building. So it would be, advisable in my sense to show that in play.
Is it reasonable for us to request that drawing?
Well, I think it's reasonable.
You have to before you can.
Yeah, have them show the proposed house on the proposed subdivision map, yes.
And
Okay.
one of the concerns that I have, and what I have not seen, is it looks like, and maybe I'm missing it, it looks like the wetland regulated areas are drawn on one map, and then you have the house on the other. So you can't see where they overlay on each other. And so for me, it takes a little bit to discern, maybe it's not brain surgery, that the entire work area is in a regulated area. So, because they're building right up to the 100-foot mark. So it means if they have to bring in all these trucks and all these things, it's all going to be in the adjacent regulated area and potentially the regulated area,
But that's a separate,
right?
but that's after this. It's another subsequent thing. That doesn't change subdivision. That's
Well, it,
going back.
it can, just in terms of what sort of, if we want to impose any kind of conservation easements on those parcels. So, and that is within our rights to think about and even impose on them. So in like in terms of lot one, if let's just say for argument's sake, we did impose something that would affect their building, which is why it's helpful to see where it's conceived. I mean, you can see it on this one, and what Sean's talking about, this was in the last submission, you can see that the edge of the dwelling is actually right on, it's like 100 point something.
Yeah, no, they talk about that they understand it's going to be in a regulated area and that there is a forthcoming revegetation plan, but, you really don't know. So does that mean they're taking down 100 trees to work in that area? And then what is their vegetation, area? I've driven up and down that hill separately to try to figure out where the driveway comes out, because I do have safety concerns and I don't have any, there's no landmarks on the map to be able to figure out where there's some telephone poles and there's some whatever. So, and the slope that comes off of that is very high in some cases. And so it'd be helpful to know with some landmarks, where is the driveway along that route? And then how much are they having to dig into the side of the hill there to create an opening? Because it is, for me, a safety concern of making that a workable lot.
So if you'd like, then we could put together a memo to go back to the applicant's representative and ask them to make improvements on the drawings as is.
Show
And
the
our,
proposal on the map.
Right. That would be very helpful.
Hi,
Hi.
Bailey Larkin, I'm with Bennett and Reed.
oh, hello, welcome.
Slowly making your way up.
Yeah, sorry, I was letting you guys finish up your
Okay.
discussion on it. We can give you a map showing the proposed house on this. Our discussion in our submission was just a demonstration, because I think the question had been raised as to whether lot one was buildable or not, which was, we were trying to demonstrate that it is with the approvals that we've received for that property. So it wasn't a question of, this house, this lot, it's a demonstration that that property is actually a buildable lot. We did include in that package, I think there was a question about revegetation. There's a New York State DEC approved revegetation plan that was included in there that Hollander Design had submitted on that application. But we can, if you'd like, we can have a superimposed plan showing it. I think sketch plans are typically plans that don't ever have structures on them. So we can file it as a separate independent plan from what the sketch plan that's before you for approval is. But we can show you that the lot's been designed so that that house could potentially in the future be located on that property. With respect to the driveway location, it's actually something that was discussed at length at the town board level when we had public hearings before the town board for the special permit. The driveway was located in a specific location so that it was outside the regulated area specifically. And there is a construction methodology included in there showing that we can accomplish the construction of that driveway, keeping all construction vehicles outside of the regulated area as well. So there's a full parking plan in there. I don't know if everybody's got a chance to look at it. And there's also a description of how there was going to be sheet pile construction in order to construct that actual driveway so that there's less disturbance on the property. So, but if it's something the board would like, I can definitely have an additional plan submitted showing the house.
Yes, because I think the concern we're having is if the building is right up against that wetlands boundary, there's gonna be, that's not the building envelope, and obviously trucks have to go in there, you're gonna have other disturbance going into the adjacent regulated area, and we're trying to stay out of that area. So if we were hypothetically to impose another buffer on there, that could affect your building, because then you're gonna have to push it back. So just to, in all fairness, just trying to think ahead.
And so I think within there, they say, there is a work area, and we tried to put it at the widest point where we think we might have to work, and we're really hoping that it won't be that wide. But I don't, at least as far as maybe I didn't see it, never says how wide that actually is. So
problematic because if your construction goes up to the 100-foot line and you're digging a foundation, the angle of proposed is going to be another 20 feet.
No, yeah,
Into
you're
the-
covering at least the
area.
entire adjacent regulated area and maybe more, and that's all wooded. So, and the type of construction they're doing is aggressive in order to achieve that in the hill. So that's a lot of destruction in the wetlands in order to accomplish that.
Our construction methodology actually includes a limited disturbance at that 75 foot.
I'm just looking at it, I was gonna say it's right at the 75.
Yeah.
It's at the 70-foot line, and then there's the separate revegetation plan that was submitted
Yeah,
to
I can see
DEC
that.
for revegetation of that 25-foot buffer entirely after construction.
Is there a DEC report on this? I can't remember.
It's easy.
It's in that, it's in the.
It's in it, okay.
It's in the last submission.
And what do they identify other than bats, if anything? I don't remember. I don't know if that's you'd think it's a pipe and clover area, but I'm not sure.
I think it has bat regulations, which I think everyone has now, which is a clearing restriction. And
Right. And that's the only species that they identified?
Not on this one, I don't believe they identified plovers.
You're saying so the clearing, but not the construction, will take place within that adjacent regulated area
Correct,
between
yeah.
75 and 100 feet?
Yeah. And there is, on the construction methodology, there is actually a site plan drawn up showing the limits of disturbance, proposed locations for self-fencing, protection measures to
And they stay clear of the 75-foot setback.
entirely. And that's what the SWIP contemplates also, that's approved. And we have actually updated the SWIP and filed the new forms required to continue the coverage under New York State's.
So I'm sorry, I may not have seen it because I read something that said a forthcoming, more detailed vegetative plan in one of the pamphlets, and maybe so that was.
Okay.
Do you know off the top of your head in the revegetation plan, if in the adjacent regulated area, they're taking down 50 trees, are they putting mature trees back in, or they're putting in grasses? And, do you have any sense of?
Confirm for you. That's what we have on.
I would definitely.
I would guess in their view, grasses.
Well, that's my point, which is, that's not like for like, right?
But as you've seen there's great tree growth, from the pictures we sent.
Yeah.
Part of the location of the driveway was also based on the existing trees along shore as well. Where they were trying to minimize the cut on shore so that they could keep trees along property frontage as well there, which is why the plan was drawn with conservation easements in that section as well. Because it was a concern for, at the zoning board level, visibility from Shore Road.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what jumped out at me,
You're
and
also, I'm sorry.
clearly wasn't part of those town board discussions, but when I looked, I kept saying, well, there's a telephone pole here and there's a telephone pole here, and there's this, and so you carve out, what is your line of sight going to be? And I'm sure they're focused on their own protection, but what does that mean in terms of how wide, and, you have to do that, and I can look further in at the, if I missed some detail in there.
And also, we have to take into consideration all the walls that they're putting up, all those retaining walls, those stepped walls. I'm just looking at my notes here, that's you're only gonna get a little bit of planting in there, and you're gonna have to take out a whole bunch of trees to get those steep series of steps. So if you're already taking out trees there, might as well already look to see how we can mitigate it on the down below.
the driveway is a little problematic, and as you know, it's a county road. So the county actually has to approve driveway location. But I drove back and forth, because one side it's a hill, the other side it's on a curve. And from the curve or the hill, where you just come over, from the time you can see the driveway to the time you pass it, if you're going 40 miles an hour, which is too fast, is 4 seconds. Now, go to Sunset Beach and have 3 drinks, and then it's 3 seconds because you're going too fast. So the driveway makes me a little nervous because it's a curve and a hill, so.
That's the one thing that always concerned me about this, was that driveway through a busy road with,
Yeah.
you got kids going down there, drunk people.
And we did
Is it
have
your
one
sense-
incident already.
Is it your sense, and I'm sorry, like, how far up from the yellow arrows would the driveway be? I've
It
driven
was
down
very
it.
close to one of the poles, I think it's the first
Telephone
pole
poles?
up.
Yeah.
between the first pole up
Pull up,
and then the next one.
Okay.
Either way, it's about 200 feet or something over to the curb. And I had to look this up, at 45 miles an hour, it's 66 feet per second.
and no, I've driven it up and down many times to try to figure out, yeah.
So if that's something that you could prepare for the next time, or get it over to us for the next meeting.
Do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next step on this is they're gonna come back with the things that we just asked in terms of like the vegetation, showing the area of disturbance in more detail. Yeah. We'll send a follow-up memo, just so we can follow it, so. All right, are we okay with that? Can I move on to the next one? Okay, so the Row Minor subdivision, we're still waiting on the revised sketch plan, so that's on the applicant right now. And the white performance bond is still on the horizon somewhere. Well, it's being monitored by the town board, so. All right, we have two advisory memos to work on in terms of, we have wetlands permit applications for Jeffy and Coppins.
It's not on Mortgage Drive.
Yeah. Jeffy is on Mortgage Drive.
Is it?
So I went there with Sean, and let's start with that one first.
It's not Westmoreland Drive?
Small. Goodson is Mortgage Drive.
Right.
Oh, actually, Jessica, there's a typo on there. It's Westmoreland, let me. Jeffy is 19 Westmoreland.
Went to the wrong house.
No, we went to Westmoreland, don't worry. All right, let me just, that's at 19 Westmoreland.
Nobody's representing them at this meeting, right? Okay, we don't know.
Oh, okay, we're not even all. Did you want to talk us through a little bit?
Yeah, actually, Matt Sherman is also on for this application, so I'll let him lead his presentation.
Sorry, tell us your
Say
name.
who you are, right?
David Renault, architect for the
Got it.
Jeffrey residence at 19 Westmoreland Drive.
Matt?
Hey, good evening. Matt Sherman, Sherman Engineering and Consulting. I'm working with Ray on this project. I'll just give you a real quick rundown on what we're doing here. It's a developed single-family lot, or residential lot, excuse me, has a single-family dwelling on it, up by the road, has a accessory building that's got a garage and some living space in it, down by the water. 2 septic systems on site, 1 supply well, some asphalt, and some other things. The property's just developed over the years, all of it predating town, town code, town regulations. So the idea here is, and there's 2 lots. One is the landward lot, and then there's another one that's seaward, which is where the bulkhead is. Bulkhead work has just recently been redone, some work on the dock that's been redone. So some things have been going on here. Another project happening on the property right next door, which is loosely associated with this one. What we end up having here is all the existing site construction is going away. So we're removing a septic system from the regulated area. We're removing a accessory dwelling from the regulated area. Excuse me, not accessory dwelling, accessory building from the regulated area. We're removing the existing single family dwelling. And then we're going to be regrading and reconstructing on this property with a new single family dwelling that is designed in order to get the driveway and the parking up by the road. Septic system is up by the road. The supply well is down closer to the surface water, to the creek, which we didn't really like, but we had to get the separation distance from the septic systems. So that puts the well down there a little bit closer to the creek than we would like. And then we've got a swimming pool, a patio, and a covered porch that are going to be within the adjacent regulated area. So the 75-foot to 100-foot setbacks. Kind of a very similar kind of scenario to something that your board saw recently with the Dunn application over on Tuttle Drive and a few others where we've got the swimming pool and some patio or decking and some other associated improvements within that adjacent regulated area. So it was designed with the idea of getting everything out of the vegetative buffer, getting that most seaward septic system as far out of away from the wetlands as we could possibly get it, which is what puts it up by the road. And then so when the day is done, I think we've got a lot of significant improvements to the site in order to come up with the design that we've got now.
Well said.
Are we open for questions now?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, why are you defining that outer part of the L as your boundary to the setbacks? Because it's restricting. So you created this angle that is forcing the pool and the patio into the adjacent regulated area. Whereas if you shorten the L and change the angle, probably almost all of that would come out of the adjacent regulated area. And all that does is you're just creating more of a grand driveway at the moment by doing it the way you have it. But they could probably get the same square footage, slightly different design, and be out of all of the regulated area.
We've obviously pushed the house forward to that front yard setback as possible.
But only because you chose an L. If you push the L the other way or created a T or something and shortened it and moved the angle of the house, you could move the house much closer to the setback more generally, and the whole pool and all of that would come out of the adjacent regulated area. So it seems to be that, to me, they had a particular design in mind, but that's forcing them into the adjacent regulated area. They're building a totally new foundation. They're starting all over. There's really no reason, from my perspective, for them to be anywhere in the wetlands regulated area when they have options, plenty of options here, and it's just a slight change of some changes in design. That would be my.
The program requirements for the client are really driving the size of that garage structure, and that's what's, defining the building envelope.
Maybe, I couldn't quite figure out what is in that little filler piece. Is that a laundry room or in between the garage and the?
Laundry, there's a mudroom space, a powder room in there.
It's pretty generous, though.
I guess that's.
I mean, I could fit half my house in that little area.
Yeah,
so and I think
have all of it if you just didn't have it as a perfect L. Like, if you made it more of a T and you bought.
I don't want to redesign your house for you.
No, I mean, look, I'm sure you
do it all day, so I don't need to do it anymore.
From the look of it, it's a beautiful house. It's just the question of
it's too big.
What we go back to of it may not even be too big. It's just the way they want it laid out on the property is their own personal preference, which is forcing it into the regulated area. And you could likely have your washroom and all that kind of stuff maybe a little bit further on the back of the house rather than on this long thing of garage, washroom, everything else, and then coming into the main structure, because that's what's inhibiting you. It's the angle.
I think we've taken a very close look at entry into the garage. That's a 28-foot dimension. It's pretty tight, getting into the garage along that side. So we couldn't really expand in that direction. 28 feet is really pretty hard to turn a car around and get into a garage. I
thought that was a little tight too when I looked.
It's tight.
Yeah.
So pushing the garage over along that side or reconfiguring to accommodate that doesn't necessarily work. Angling it gives us a pinch point for that first bay, but maybe they'll put their kayaks and bicycles and things like that in there. The other two bays will be for the cars.
Is that because of the way you designed the driveway?
No, the driveway or the access to the garage is on the back side of the house. They don't want to see the garage doors from the front of the house.
I get it, I get it, but again, these are all personal preferences that,
They're program requirements
for your
for
client.
the client.
That's
yes.
not, well, we have
That's-
our own requirements.
That's where we go.
To build in the wetlands.
This just goes back to, and look, we'll go through this process, but this just goes back to, are there practicable alternatives? And there have these particular things that they would like, but that interferes or conflicts with the public interest to not be in this area. And
You know, as Matt has indicated, previous applications, we have had very similar success. And this project in particular, I think there's a lot of benefits of what we're removing and what we're kind of creating with this vegetative buffer, removing that existing structure that is 50 feet from the bulkheading or so. You know, there are a lot of other benefits where, you know, I didn't have those on those other projects. So I think that you should look at the project as a whole, as something as a huge improvement with an IA system that's towards the road. This property is also, or this project will be built at the elevation of the road level and not down low. Right now, you see the roof of the house when you kind of pull up. That's because all of that was built at a very low elevation. The garage is even lower. That garage is like at elevation 4 and floods during high tide cycles. We've seen it come over the bulkheading there. So
Sure it does.
to pull that structure out and to pull those retaining walls out and, you know, that unnatural kind of carving into the existing hill that's existing right now would all go away. And we would just regrade that as a natural slope. So that's a huge benefit to this application.
I think that's a,
You know,
yes, there are benefits, but those are a bare minimum to improve the site and make it
Oh, I-
better. I don't, you know,
I don't think so.
I don't think making a good architecture is, you know, that's goes without saying you should be trying to do that. And I'm sure you can achieve that without encroaching into the wetlands.
There's also, you know, currently lawn right up to that bulkheading. So creating a 75-foot buffer of, you know, non-mowed, non-fertilized, non-native grasses is definitely a benefit. There's an asphalt road that cuts through there. There's a lot of benefits to this application. And these are things that we proposed and approved before wetlands applications before. So.
You know,
I have a question, I guess for probably Matt. On the property also, there were 2 trees that are sort of like right in front of the house that's being proposed with like right in front of the water view. One seems a little bit more sickly than the other. I'm not sure if the one could be saved, but probably the second one. Do you have any intentions of, on that particular tree, leaving it or?
The only trees that are scheduled to be removed are the ones that are over by that cottage. As a result of the removal of the cottage and the retaining walls and the regrading would be taken down.
it's a little bit, in the application, it says specifically, remove trees in the wetland areas.
Yeah,
as part of the
we're talking
scope.
about those couple of trees.
I don't know which trees it was, I
Surrounding that.
don't have a drawing that indicates which.
Actually,
That's the
they're.
one I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah, you do.
we have, I'm not sure, I'd be surprised if they're not taking.
All the drawings you submitted digitally were cropped to print on a small sheet of paper, so when I open them,
Yeah.
you only see a little snippet of the entire drawing.
Yeah,
You guys each should have gotten a full-size set of drawings. We submitted 20 sets of the
Yeah, I
entire
did, I got
application
those as
packet.
well.
Oh, so you did get the full-size C. Okay. So then you've got drawing C 1.1 that has the vegetation plan on it, which in color shows the trees to be removed and the trees that are going to remain. We tried to make it as explicitly clear as we could.
Okay.
And those couple of trees to be removed are the ones just on the water side of the house and the opposite corner as the garage, as Ray was saying before, down by the existing accessory building. I believe the ones that Julia was describing are the ones that are over closer toward the bulkhead.
Yeah,
And the intention right now is to leave those trees as they are. There's no, that whole area is going to be revegetated with native, adjacent area vegetation. So there's no reason to take those trees out of there.
Got it. Speaking of C11, I did have a question, because we got a second site plan that was from Mr. Hemmer. And I don't remember which is, but one of them shows a new retaining wall, the entire length of the property line going to the bulkhead. I think that's his, not yours.
Yeah.
That's his, yeah, that was a,
correct.
yeah.
So there's no retaining wall proposed there. Okay.
No.
That was
It's a
actually.
Let me cross that off.
That was,
It's called out as a hedge
I was
on
showing
raised.
wait, I'm sorry, Matt, sorry, you're both talking at the same time, so.
Yeah,
Sorry.
hold on a second, Ray. If you look at my site plan and you look at Ray's site plan, it's called out as a hedge on both of those. We did not notice that it was called out as a retaining wall on the survey. So that's, I've already asked Rob over at Hemmer's office to correct that. And as soon as I get a stamped copy of the corrected survey, we'll submit that into the town as well.
All right. You mentioned the elevation of the house at 18, which is, I guess, about a foot above the road elevation right now.
Yes, exactly.
And that's great for the road, and it simplifies the slope of your driveway.
Yes.
But on the other side of the house, it means that you have a 6 to 8 foot high retaining wall. Depending on how much fill you ultimately bring in, I think the contours are shown as I think there's an 8 foot contour line at the lower end of the house. And I assume the deck is at the same elevation as the house, more or less.
No,
Does the deck
actually,
step down?
Yeah, the swimming pool steps down 3 steps, so that's it's actually
18
4
inches.
inches lower. The 16-foot contour naturally exists kind of along the back of that house, and we would continue that 16-foot contour kind of along the back side of the house. It does slope off from that point, goes 14, 12, 10, and that's the natural slope. So there are no retaining walls required to do that.
But what do you see at the side of the pool?
You would see a stone veneer wall, but it's not going to be 6 feet. That pool elevation is actually dropped a total of like 30 inches from the finished floor of the house.
Got it.
And so you're not going to see a 6 foot wall, you'll see, maybe 30 inches or 3 feet.
Sounds better. What's your plan for the overhead wire that's over the pool?
Those are being removed. Yeah, those are actually scheduled to be
We
removed.
buried?
Yeah, they're gonna bury it and bring it across the front of the property.
Yeah, I'm sure the neighbor doesn't like it either.
Yeah, that's another benefit. And those are high tension wires, it's not even like just a regular,
Right.
these are squirrels have gotten,
You not want to be in the pool with those over you.
yeah,
Let's do that.
that's work that's being done in progress right now.
Sean, did we forget anything else with just the wires, the trees? But again, I think what Sean's trying to talk to you about is just that I don't see the hardship either in keeping it where in the adjacent regulated. I mean, there's,
And I would just,
this was not like you were constrained there and you were starting with that. And
Yeah,
and I'll just add before you reply is, there, it is, from my perspective, there is, and I prefer to try to be transparent in what my thinking is or not, existing structures, some that are already in the wetlands, so, yes, potentially some improvement by moving some of them out. I personally don't think, especially when you're pouring a whole new foundation and creating a whole new structure, that you get a gimme because, there was stuff there before.
right.
I think it's more nuanced if you're saying, I'm trying to renovate an existing structure, and how do I do that because I'm not moving the house? They've already demonstrated that they're starting totally fresh in a, new place. And the only things that are in the adjacent regulated area are not the necessities of the house. They're the deck, the pool, they're the nice things to have. So there's no hardship there. You can have all the house you want and not have a pool, and you'd be better off than 99% of America, right? So there is not a hardship. And so the idea that I don't want to see the garage, or I want my washroom attached to the garage rather than a little further down in the house, you can make modifications to this. I'm not an architect, but you look at it and you go, shift it like this and move this back, and you're out of the regulated area, and you still get probably all the square footage and your pool and everything you want.
Yeah.
So the nuances of the things that they particularly want from me are not going to allow them to build this, because that doesn't push them over the threshold of,
They could leave the garage that's there, cut the garage back, so leave the building that's in the regulated area, cut the building back so that it conforms. You don't even need to have a wetlands conversation.
Not sure I understand. You're not seriously proposing they're going to keep the house that's there.
No, but they could keep that garage that's there, that has an existing, that's 50 feet from the bulkheading.
That's, I don't mean to be semantics, but if that, right, we're kind of doing game theory here, right? So if that's the game they want to play, and they say, well, then we're going to try to reserve our right to keep this existing structure and build it, put it on the table and we'll look at it. There is no driveway. It is a storage place on a slab or whatever. You want to propose a little guest house there because you shift this all out of the wetlands and you want to keep that and do it, put it on the table. But kind of like the threat of, oh, well, we're going to keep that then, it's not going to do it for me, right?
Understood.
I mean, I understand your reluctance to want to go back into the design. Obviously, you're pretty far.
No, not at all.
Well, you're pretty far along with it, so. But I mean, there are elements in that could be shortened. I mean, it has a pretty substantial covered porch facing that circular area. I mean, is that a use? Are they going to sit out and look at the cars? I mean.
No, it's more of a mudroom entrance.
If it was a little less generous, maybe you could lose a few feet. I mean, you don't have, how many feet are we talking about to get that corner out of that zone?
You have so much of the front middle part of the house that is further back from the building setbacks.
Right.
That you're choosing by design to do that. And that's what's pushing you in there. And so what I struggle with, and that's where we will hopefully get to the conversation in the future, is that the homeowner will come to you and say, I want a building and these are the setbacks and these are the things, and you'll design it without going into the setbacks.
Right.
And I believe Matt has another application that does exactly that, where it's like, hey, we're just going to do the right thing. We're moving the house and we're moving it all the way back to the 100 line. There's no reason why these people can't do the same thing.
I think the code says
smaller lot.
75, so but that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's a significantly smaller lot. And to that end, and I don't want to argue the point because, everyone has their own point of view on this, and you can ask any of the architects that are on the board. You look at the code, you look at what the code says you can and can't do. You also look at previous applications and previous approvals. And there's been, I don't know off the top of my head know how many similar applications to this where we've gotten wetlands permits for this very similar kind of condition. A pool and a patio, seaward of the house is at the front yard setback, the pool and the patio are within the regulated area, and the wetlands permit was approved. Does that mean, I'm not a big proponent of precedent, but you do have to look at what's been approved and never been denied when you're looking at how these applications should be viewed.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you mentioned Dunn, and I'll look back at several of them to see how, where they each have their nuances.
We hear that, though, I have to say, Matt, we hear that argument, or I've heard it in the ZBA, having listened in, where people say, I want a bigger house, you approve so-and-so's bigger house, you should approve mine. And, it's like they say with the ads for the mutual funds, past performance is no indication of future gains or whatever. I think it puts a burden on the board to say, we have an expectation that things will be approved because another board did approve them. I mean, there's no reason for us, I mean, they brought in some new people, so, we should get to exercise our opinions.
Can we say
Fair
that we're,
enough.
like, we're at a good point to write the advisory memo to the town board? We have enough information and
It's just advisory.
you're satisfied with the answers? Okay, good. All right, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you,
Pam,
we
so this is
appreciate it.
This is a work session, so I'm not going to be taking any comments from anyone on Zoom just yet. All right, Copens. And we had
David.
David.
I went look at it too.
Oh, did you?
Well, we
Okay.
went separately.
Separately, yeah.
But thank you both for going. All right, and do we have anybody here from that application?
That'd be
Yeah,
me.
you're doing that one too. Yeah.
Yep, that'd be me.
All right. Did you want
Here's the
to go
example.
first, Matt, and
Here's the
talk
example
about
work.
Copens?
Yeah, I can give you a real quick rundown on this one as well. This is kind of like the opposite of the last one, where we've got a much larger piece of property, already developed, single-family dwelling, accessory building with living quarters in it, pool, patios, decks, septic, all that kind of stuff. This wetlands application is for the removal of the existing improvements that are within the regulated area. Because of the size of this property, they were able to push everything back. So all of the new construction is outside of the 100-foot setback. So there's really not a whole lot to talk about on this one. The first 75 feet is being revegetated with native adjacent area vegetation. Couple of little pathways in order to get from the house area down to the water. But other than that, it's going to be all non-turf buffer. So this is kind of like the, this is the poster child, which I think is how the CAC referred to it as, the poster child of what you would want to see a wetlands permit to look like.
So I have a couple, I'm David quite a bit.
I've already spoken for a while.
I'll start. I only have a little bit. But here's some interesting stuff. The one thing I thought was interesting was it's like you got everything out of the adjacent regulated area except for this gravel walkway and stuff. Was that purely just for symmetry?
That's
That's the first thing I
exactly.
noticed.
I asked the same question. I mean, we're all looking at the same plans. I
It's
asked the
like-
same question, and that was it. That was so that things look, had a visual layout that was more pleasing. I mean,
Yeah.
those kinds of details are lost on me, but I'm not an architect. So, or a design, that kind of a designer. So that's where it falls out. But being a gravel walkway,
Yeah, it's,
that's only a few square feet. It's not really going to have any kind of an impact either
Yeah,
way. So
I just wanted to
I
make
didn't
sure.
push the issue.
That was my, again, going here and seeing the space and trying to envision all this on top of us, trying to figure out, that was the only thing I could figure. So cool. There were some other things on, when I was trying to figure out the trees being removed, it was a little difficult in the space. And it looked like some trees that were being,
That's the one that shows all the, that's the one that
shows removals. But what was it? But I was trying, it was very hard to tell from the actual
Those
property.
two big trees are buried in.
That's
there,
why.
I've actually had to measure and see where they laid
Okay.
out, and they're in there.
That explains my confusion. And so,
I had the same panic.
yeah, okay. So really, it's actually only a few trees, and it's all outside of the adjacent regulated area. So I guess I have no other comments for the other major ones. Dave, I know you had some interesting things around.
I had a few comments.
Yeah.
Matt,
Piping clovers and.
Yeah.
well, I'll get back to those, but
Yeah.
Matt, when you're putting these sets together,
Oh, this is the squares.
we have, like 5 different site plans and 3 different versions of where north is. And there's some sheets where the same plan is oriented at 180 degrees, where north is one way and one way and the
I was
other.
doing lots of
And then
this.
there's one where north. Can we make an effort to have north in the same orientation in every plan?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
It's like turning everything over.
I was doing the same thing.
And the area totals are above 6,000 feet. I mean, that's not a wetlands issue, but at some point, somebody is going to recognize that. Between the main house at 5386 and the 800 feet of bedrooms above the garage, they're above 6,000 feet. But That'll be someone else's
Not our-
business.
Our pay grade.
I see they've already started clearing, and there's 3 substantial trees that used to be there, and they're no longer there. And I just want to emphasize the bat thing, and there's no tree clearing between March 1st and November 30th. I don't know when they're planning on cutting the other 4 trees down indicated on your removals plan.
Yeah, the reason why those few trees came down when they did was because of the bats. We wanted to get them down before before they were prohibited to take them down. I believe the other 4 trees that need to come down, I think, are the ones that are in that driveway area and
Yeah.
by the septic, by the leaching field. So, you know, we're quite a ways away from having to worry about those. You know, it's the ones by the house that are the ones that are in more, you know, were more urgent to have them taken out during this past window as opposed to waiting to the next window.
Got it.
Yeah, I
And
think that, what is it, December 1st to March 1st is the window
Yeah.
that you can take trees down,
Correct.
with some exceptions that we're working on some projects right now, trying to work through some of those exceptions.
Right. And you know, those 2 significant trees, there's a 34-inch or something like that, and 40-inch caliper trees that are in that wetland setback, but they're also very close to the proposed demolition. And potentially to the new excavation. So I don't know what the precedent is for having an arborist identify critical root zones before they excavate and showing protection on your drawings for, you know, how you're going to put a cage around the trunk of the tree so someone doesn't drive a backhoe into it. I mean, is that a normal requirement? Anyway, because those are valuable trees and I wouldn't want to see them demolished. Yeah, the timing of the demolition also, they do flag piping clovers on this site.
Mhm.
And, you know, I looked that up and that's like March to August. So I don't know what their schedule is for demolition, but you know, they're endangered. So I'm sure they aren't going to appreciate backhoes driving over them. There's some, I wrote the numbers down wrong, but the stormwater calculations between C1 and C11 are a little different. And I mean, just take a look at those because they don't tie together. But I'm curious in general about impervious areas other than roofs, because your dry wells seem to be based on roofs only.
Mhm.
And in these sensitive zones where you're going to have runoff towards the wetlands and towards the salt water, for that matter, is there a requirement to capture runoff from, you know, patios or driveways, even if they're gravel driveways? And is
There's
it
no
good
town
practice?
requirement. The town requirement is for impermeable surfaces, concrete, asphalt, things like that. But I mean, you guys can always make whatever recommendation to the town board you think is appropriate for them to take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think, I mean, I know rainwater sheets off a lawn, you know, it's not, even though it's grass, it's not really permeable in a heavy rain. So I mean, you'd think that when you're right adjacent to wetlands, it would be good practice to collect stormwater. But
I'm not a big fan of dry wells because you're basically injecting groundwater. I mean, you're injecting stormwater closer to groundwater. You're not allowing a lot of the natural filtration to occur. I'm a big fan of like the 75-foot non-turf buffer. Let that slow the overland flow down long before it gets to the wetlands area. Let it, you know, feed those plants that are there and recharge that way. I think that's a much better way to handle it. Same thing with plantings around buildings. The idea that you've got to put in dry wells, and that's what the town code says, you got to put in dry wells for the roof areas. I think that kind of limits some of the better ways to handle these things, but it's that, you know, that's what the regulation says.
right. And the last thing is that, I mean, there is an increase in impervious surfaces on the site with the new construction, I think of about 5%. And I mean, I don't know where we are in terms of mitigating that, but it's just a fact. They're building a much bigger house.
Mhm.
For the let the record show they're increasing it
We have it down.
over the project. That's all I have. Thank you, Matt.
I think
Marcus,
Yeah, good, thank you.
Pretty clean.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Pretty
And I
much
believe
window
that's,
They're taking everything out, you know, so.
yeah. Well, gentlemen, I believe that's it for the meeting. Meg wants to. Meg Morrison,
I
yeah.
have the answer, Sean. I didn't have earlier. So I did misspeak earlier. We set the public hearings. We haven't had the public hearings. So right now, the public hearings are set for Monday for secret fees related to the environmental quality review section of the code, site plan review section of the code, subdivisions, wetland zoning are all going to be public hearings for Monday night. And then we're also setting the public hearing for the secret fees for the dock code Monday night, so that'll be next month. But the hearing set is happening Monday, so if anyone has comments on whether or not fees should be passed to the applicant, that would be the time to be heard.
Did you see the effective date, how it was handling?
The Secretary of State, so once the Secretary of State accepts them as our new code, then they would go into effect. So if you, any application that would come in after that, or any environmental review that would start after that, I think would go underneath that. Not sure about the logistics, how it will be implemented, but we'll sort that out hopefully before.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Can I have a motion to close the meeting?
Motion, close the meeting.
Second, all right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.